Hello, welcome, and we're so happy to have you here. We always start with these warm-up questions, and listeners of our pods are beginning to see patterns in the answers. So I'm fascinated to see what you, Johnny and Amy and Tom are going to, no pressure, are going to bring to answer these questions. Firstly, what kind of a student were you? And secondly, did you ever have a tutor? Johnny, will you kick us off?
Sure. I was probably a slightly annoying, overachieving student. Especially in maths, was kind of a year or two ahead of my class from primary school and sort of ended up taking my GCSE maths a year early. But it was definitely in a setting where it wasn't sort of favourable to be academically smart. You know, it was difficult sort of having friends and you know, that whole sort of dichotomy of pupils, if you can't work hard and be cool, definitely applied in my schoal. So it's slightly, you know, frustrating, especially, you know, getting older and having learned that in other schools that's not the case. I kind of wish that I'd had more opportunities sort of elsewhere, perhaps. And no, I never had a tutor. In fact, I started tutoring when I was 15 because of being so strong in maths. Started teaching one of my sisters who's 4 years younger than me, one of her friends. And then that went well, so I started teaching their neighbour, and then their neighbour's neighbour as well. So before I could even drive, this was down in Sussex. I think the first mum used to come and pick me up, the second mum would give me dinner, and the third mum would drive me back home again. So as a 15-year-old getting £10 an hour, I think it was a pretty sweet gig. And yeah, that was the beginning of tuition for me. Is when I moved to London. Carried on tutoring right the way through university and then set up the tuition agency. So never had a tutor, but yeah, that's what 20 odd years of tutoring now in one way or another.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That really kicked us off. Amy, go ahead.
I would agree. I was really hardworking. My dad was actually the head of the sixth form at the school that I went to, so I didn't really have a choice. Otherwise, I was always had to be on my best behaviour. I definitely tended to prefer subjects like maths, where it's problem solving, and I always wanted to work to get a correct solution. I don't think I quite had the imagination for sort of English and some of the art subjects. And in terms of tutoring, I did have an A-level maths tutor actually. To get some support with that, and had a really good experience there. Just kind of helped with some of those more challenging topics. I've done a little bit of tutoring in my time, and it's really interesting because lots of people think being a teacher in front of a large class is a real challenge, but I actually, you know, admire tutors that work to one because I think their challenges are very different but sort of equal.
That is fascinating. We can't wait to plumb that seam. That sounds like a really, really interesting line to go down. Let's hold on to that question about the difference between teaching and tutoring. Tom, go ahead.
Okay, so I definitely continue the theme in that I would call myself a hard-working student. I was definitely someone who we tried almost that little bit too hard, and that little bit, you know, always trying to go the extra mile, as it were. But I was definitely more of an English, philosophy, ethics kind of student. I was more about the creative writing side than the maths and figures. Maths and figures was never my particular strong point, which is interesting actually, because now that I've gone into teaching, I'm glad to almost put more work into the maths and the science and the figures side. That's probably made me more of a fan of those now. So my interests have probably changed, but that's only because who becoming a teacher. Which has kind of made me think whether was it because I didn't like the subject because I wasn't good at it, or was it because I was perhaps how I was taught the subject at school, which, you know, who knows. And did I have a tutor? So I didn't have a tutor. I benefited from mentoring programs when I was at secondary school. So that was one with the sort of interest, which was more around kind of career mentoring. And again, that was one-to-one. So whilst that wasn't based on maths and English tutoring and on my school subjects, I started to see the benefits of what one-to-one or small group tuition can have. And that was what got me interested in education and got me into teaching.
Fantastic. So the benefits were really far-reaching.
Definitely.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. I could keep going in those lines, but we have specific things that we want to talk about in this podcast, which is not usual for us because we do tend to like a good ramble. But let's see if we can really, really add value to the conversation in this session. So the first thing that we wanted to ask you about was, how do students benefit from tutoring in school? And which students will benefit the most? And Amy, we thought we'd ask you first because you've had this opportunity to be deploying tutors, Manning's tutors, in your school. And so you have a little bit of a track record and you're able to see a little bit of the impact over. Please give us a sense of how many years and how you've been using those tutors. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we've been using Manning's tutors probably for about 10 years now, the best part of 10 years, maybe a few more, mainly in one-to-one or two-to-one settings. But we've also been able to rely on Manning's to provide us with some cover for teachers of larger groups where we've either not been able to recruit a teacher to continue on with a course, but I'd say mainly one-to-one and two-to-one tutoring, particularly with our pupil premium and disadvantaged students. Shall I talk about the benefits?
Go ahead, yes.
They're huge.
Yeah.
So I think the first thing is that one-to-one attention definitely raises accountability for the students. Sometimes some of these students can get a bit lost in the classroom setting. However, when you're one-to-one or two-to-one, there's really no hiding from the content being taught. The student has to engage with it. And I think it's easy for the tutor to kind of check whether or not the students understand, as long as they're asking the right questions, in a way that sometimes students can opt out of that process in the classroom. But although the challenge is probably greater for the students and the accountability, they also get the benefit of lots of support compared to a classroom setting. So there's opportunity for them to ask as many questions about the content as they like. They can take it at the right pace for them. The tutor can shape the explanation for the child and build up that relationship, working out how best the child likes to learn and make sure that they use that approach moving forward. One of the things that we found particularly useful is when we shared a question level analysis with Johnny's tutors, so you can identify the exact areas of weakness for that child, and the tutor can focus in on those areas in a way that the classroom teacher might not always have time to give that individual attention. And we found that to be really useful, because if you take that approach, it's also easier to monitor the impact the tutoring's happening, because I think far too often these interventions are put in place but nobody really has any way of telling whether or not it's having the impact that you hope it is. And then I guess lastly, I just want to share that I think the benefits of tutoring go way beyond the 1 hour session itself. It can often give the child a newfound confidence, new motivation to then go on and carry out extra independent study sort of outside of both lessons and their tutoring time. And when the tutor shows that they believe in the child often wants to do well for them in that development of the relationship. And I've definitely seen tutoring relationships develop into something more like a mentoring relationship, and there's real power in that. And then lastly, I think that the tutoring platform, that hour, it offers these students a chance to experience success. And these are often students that don't experience success in the classroom. And that can help them, again, have that greater belief in themselves, which can have wide-reaching effects in terms of their academic and personal development, I'd say.
Fantastic. I'm going to give you an extra lastly. When we chatted about this, Amy, you said something that really struck me. You said that they get the opportunity, the students, to associate effort with attainment. Because if they're lost in a classroom, they actually never get that opportunity to realize that if they apply themselves, they can be successful. Because if the pace is too fast in the classroom, or the pitch is off in that classroom, or they're distracted because it's not cool to be high achieving in that classroom, then that tutor can give them the opportunity to create that association.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Well, it was your thought. But I really think that was up and ran with it, because I'd never quite seen it before, and that was really, really helpful. Johnny, give us your insights. Go ahead.
Well, I was hoping Amy was going to stop talking, because every single point that I wanted to make, she just kept on getting to another one. I'm also going to ask Amy to rewrite our brochure, because she's...
Good luck, Tom, as well, following that up.
So succinctly there. Yeah, the benefits, like Amy says, you do these QLAs and you see the elements that the class is struggling with, and for a teacher they can look at it and go, oh look, there's this topic that everyone's struggling with, I need to revisit that, and that's completely fine. But they might look and say, oh look, there's a topic that 2 pupils are struggling with, I can't dedicate a class to teaching that. And that's where that nuance of tuition can be really beneficial, because we can then drill down into those topics with those individual pupils. So yeah, it's a more flexible approach for a classroom teacher to make sure that all of those gaps are being plugged. And then, yeah, for the pupils, you've got this other voice. So that's what I quite often describe it as, because some schools we go into this, there's some resistance from teachers. Sometimes they say, well, why don't we just come in after school and do some extra sessions with the kids? They said, well, they've already had you in the daytime in the classroom. Wouldn't it be nice if they got just a fresh perspective of it in the evening? And, you know, there are many different companies out there doing lots of different things with tuition. Our speciality is using undergraduates, people who have been through the GCSEs and A-levels, yeah, in the recent few years, and kind of see eye to eye with the people. They understand the stresses and strains they're under. They can relate to these pupils, and sometimes that can just make all the difference, you know, when they get that one-to-one opportunity. And like Amy says, I mean, our guidance to our tutors is to be reactive. They have a lesson plan just in case they're not getting anything out of the pupil, but the main objective for them is to go in and say, what did you do in school today? Or what have you been doing this week? And yeah, can you do that? And generally the kid will say, oh yeah, I'm fine with that. We'll say, don't believe that for a second. Get them to show you. And then you suddenly find out that maybe they're not as confident on it as they claim they are. And you can make sure that they're fully up to speed on that, whatever's being covered by the teacher that day or that week, before moving on to whatever you might have had planned for the lesson. And that means that that is the child that is going to be sat in the class with their hand up, contributing, because they're with the programme at that point. They've got that confidence. Like Amy said, then the benefit of this 1 hour of tuition just spills over and multiplies upon itself, which is really, really awesome.
Johnny, tell us about those tests that you did, the weekly tests where you were looking at the same cohort.
That was a programme for what was then called Quinton Kynaston in St John's Wood, where the entire year group, so 120 odd pupils I think it was doing a GCSE maths mock every fortnight. And what we did was we took those mocks home and marked them for the school overnight and produced a full QLA and said, look, here are, I think it was 30 pupils at first, but it went so well they expanded it to 40, who have made the least progress since the last mock. They haven't really moved on. And we took those 40 pupils and we gave them half an hour of tuition every single day for the next 2 weeks. So we had some tutors that were in full time. They were sat in one place and just a new kid would arrive every half an hour. These pupils didn't miss too much of the same lesson because it was like they came at 9:30 every day. So yeah, they missed a different subject every day. It wasn't too impactful. And what we did was we gave them the 5 topics that those pupils had struggled with that the rest of the class hadn't. Drilled them on those over the next 2 weeks, and then we got this wonderful sort of controlled assessment or randomized controlled trial, because we had 40 kids we'd worked with and another 80 that we hadn't worked with, and they did the test. And I nervously got all the marks and looked at it. I was like, oh, please say our 40 did better. And every single time, I mean, there was sort of 50, 60, 70% more improvement from the pupils we'd worked with than the others, which was awesome. But then I thought, oh, hang on a second, we're cheating here, because we're just drilling them on 5 topics and they're walking back in and they're smashing those. Of course they've improved. So I went into more granular detail, as I want to do as a mathematician, and was checking, okay, are they just getting those 5 topics this time? But because the school was setting a calculator paper followed by a non-calculator paper from the same series, the same topics that we were drilling them on weren't even coming up. So we were drilling them on things they weren't being tested on, and yet somehow they were still doing better. And from that, we kind of interpreted that just the confidence level was generally rising, that they were having a stab at the questions. And that was the qualitative feedback we got from the school as well. They said in the mock room, they could see the 40 that we've been working with, because they were the ones that were still there working, as the hour and a half elapsed. So that was really awesome. That was a great sort of little study. Such positive results.
Johnny.
Yeah, we should write that. That's brilliant.
Johnny, do you help you do anything for English as well, or was it just maths?
No, we do, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was quite an intense program. We do all subjects. I mean, English and maths have historically been the highest demand subjects, especially when, you know, it was 5A starter Cs, including maths and English, that schools were judged on. It was such a binary pass or fail for a school to get a pupil from a D up to a C in maths or English. So that is where all the focus went. I think, you know, we worked with Paddington Academy about 8-9 years ago, where we were doing 100 hours a week, and it was purely that CD borderline. What I really liked about 9 to 1 is seeing attention spread out across all subjects and all levels, because it's just as valuable to get a pupil from an 8 to a 9 in geography nowadays, or yeah, I know it's still double weighted for maths and English, but yeah, it's a real boost to get a pupil from that should be getting a 9 that's sitting on an 8 in any subject. So yeah, we've got 240 tutors across all subjects, and really nice to get that attention to all the pupils.
Much broader view, isn't it? Fantastic. Tom, can you talk to us about the relationship between tutors and teachers? Because we're anticipating that when the NTP tutors arrive in schools, one of the relationships that's going to have to be established and developed is partnerships between tutors and teachers, which is new for most schools. And with your teacher hat on and your tutor hat on, could you talk to us about how that dynamic might work in the crazy, constantly changing environment of a school?
Sure. So what I think is there's going to have to be quite a big focus on developing trust between teachers and tutors, especially in the early days. I was thinking about this when we had the tutor training last week, and it made me realise how one of the good things about having this almost uniform tutor training is that it's showing that there are, I suppose you could say, kind of like agreed rules and, you know, agreed principles which all tutors agree to. And also that then reminded me of the teacher standards. But the difference is, where teacher standards everybody's heard of or has a good idea about, perhaps with tutoring, the idea that all tutors, wherever they tutor, still buy into, you know, certain principles or values, that's perhaps not as quite clearly communicated. So what I think is to develop that successful partnership between tutors and teachers, it first starts with the tutor training, and making tutors feel part of the whole school staff team, rather than just an add-on. And I think part of that will be making sure that their responsibilities are clear. So again, I think the tutors will be a really useful resource for schools. But then if those resources aren't used in the way they should, then there's a chance that they'll either just be an expensive member of staff in the school, not really contributing as much as hoped, or that could actually lead to perhaps tension between tutors and existing teachers, because they'll be thinking, what is my role, what is your role, kind of, where do they merge a little bit. And I think that with schools being so busy in September, with all the other things you'll have to deal with, making sure that all staff get on, including new staff who are tutors, is going to be really important. And also, which I thought, the other part which just came to mind then, is the idea that it should almost be explained to existing staff, to teachers, what the tutors are there for. So I think in lots of schools, and in my school guilty of this too, there'll be this big initiative which you're taking part in, but isn't always explained particularly well to all staff. And what that means is, there might be this example, a new tutor in school, but no one really knows what they're doing there. And I think we need to kind of explain to teachers, what is so good about tutoring, why the tutoring can help our school and our pupils, and actually, see the value in them being there, rather than just being someone else in the building. And I think definitely based on the area where my school is, where generally there's a misconception that tutoring is more for privileged children, if I should say, or that tutoring is something which only people who perhaps can afford tutoring, they can benefit from it. And that's going to be something which I think schools are going to have to kind of tackle that misconception, to encourage not just children to participate, but parents to want their children to participate as well. I think that's going to be another focus. Lots to do.
Tom, you nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. Amy, could you respond?
Yeah, I totally agree about that clarity of communication and everyone being really clear on what their purpose is. I think I'd add really frequent contact between the tutor and the teacher, just to make sure that there's no overlap, or should I say time wasted, because time is going to be so precious. So being really clear about what the child has succeeded at and what topics should be covered next. And I also think sort of joint observations work really well. So we had a tutor in our school recently that was teaching, and I went in and observed them and gave them some feedback. And for example, whilst their subject knowledge was excellent, they had less experience on the formative assessment side of things. I have to say, this wasn't a one-to-one, this was a small class. So, to be fair, she straight out of university had no experience of teaching a whole class, but she was so receptive, and we got her using mini whiteboards, so she was able to, assess the understanding of the whole class at once, and it really improved sort of the impact she was having. And likewise, inviting tutors in to observe in lessons so that they can see how it's done in the classroom setting. And then if you've got that sort of mutual feedback relationship, then hopefully nobody feels kind of threatened. You can see that it's all just open and transparent, and that sort of relationship's really positive.
Amy, this is new news to me, because you're talking about building space within the tutor's timetable in school for them to do things other than working one-to-one in order to improve the impact of their one-to-one working. So if the school wanted to make use of that, they'd actually have to leave space in the timetable and sort of discuss that with the agency, wouldn't they? That's quite an interesting and sort of longer view of how to make use of a tutor in a school.
Yeah, I think it's so important though that they're asking the right questions in terms of testing understanding and things like that. And if you're going to be investing in the tutoring, you want to make sure that it's having the greatest impact. So I'm obviously not talking about taking a huge amount of time out, but yeah, I think it is worth doing properly if we're going to be doing it.
Yes, and you mentioned earlier about testing and sort of impact data. Who administers that? The teachers or the tutors or both?
So I would say it tends to be both, and one of the sort of middle or senior leaders would have oversight of that, to look at the sort of to track on a topic by topic level. So unlike when Johnny was talking about them doing different sets of mock exams, we would have almost more of a pre and a post assessment. So we'd give them 5 topics, they'd do an initial assessment based on those 5 topics and usually perform very poorly, and then they'd have their block of tutoring and they'd do a post assessment so that you could really assess the impact, particularly on those topics that had been covered.
Fascinating. Fantastic. Johnny, do you want to take it from here? Talking about establishing the partnerships between the agency and the school?
Yeah, and the closer that agencies and schools can work together, the better impact we're going to have for all the pupils involved in this school tuition relationship. Tom mentioned communication between teachers and the tutors. I think that is absolutely vital. You do need resistance in some places where you just feel that it's like, oh, why is this agency coming? Why is this tutor coming in? And why do they think they can do it better? It's not a case of that. It's like, let's unify, let's pull in the same direction. So one of the key ways that we try and do that is to ask the individual teachers of the school, the pupils, to list these 5 topics that the pupils are struggling with and to send it to us before the first lesson, so that each tutor is walking in knowing exactly what that pupil is struggling with. We've had mixed results with that. Sometimes it comes through wonderfully. I mean, everything that I've done with Amy Garn has been, everything's been there because she's on top of it all. Sometimes we don't get it. Well, the most frustrating one is when someone just sends the same 5 topics for an entire class. And so, well, if those 5 topics are the ones that are struggling with, then you can do that in the class. Let's get this down to a granular level so that we can have the greatest impact here. And put that effort in, and we'll all get more out of it as a result. I think, like Amy says, pre-tests, post-tests. I even advocate for a sort of midway test if you can as well, if you're running a 10 or 12 week. I think NTP is sort of pushing for a 15-week programs, which is wonderful because you could then do a partway test. Say you had a cohort of 40 pupils doing maths, 40 doing English, 40 doing science. If you did a partway test, it would give you the opportunity to look at it and say, oh look, these pupils are doing phenomenally well. In fact, they've caught up. Wonderful. Let's actually take them off the scheme and put some other pupils in that can benefit from it. Look, these pupils are doing pretty well. I think they could benefit with continuing to the end of the scheme. Or hang on, look, these pupils, they aren't benefiting from this for whatever reason. Let's identify why not. Are they in a 3-to-1 that they're slipping to the back of the group somehow, or not engaging, or is there an attendance issue or a sort of behaviour issue going on? So if you do that at the midway point, you have the opportunity to make sure that you use the second half of the programme to its greatest effect. But yeah, like I said, the more collaboration we can get going between schools, SLT, teachers, tutors and tutoring agencies, the better.
So talk to us about your procedures. So Johnny and Amy, you talk to each other and then the teachers and the tutors talk to each other?
Yes, but I'd say the member of the senior leadership team in charge would probably actually talk to all the stakeholders, from the child to the tutor to Johnny. And I think, just to build on what Johnny said, I think if an agency can really strip back the sort of admin side of things, I think that's really, and I think that's one of the things that Johnny does really, really well. You know, there's certain key bits of information that he needs, and obviously we get that, but all the other stuff he just takes out of our hands, which, you know, when you're busy in the day-to-day running of a school is so helpful. Yeah, sorry, I've forgotten what the original question was.
Hang on, and I actually wanted to nudge you even further in terms of the agencies being really organised, because we're going to have a whole conversation around bubbles and all of the safeguarding procedures that are going to become part of our daily risk assessment. So how are you going to be speaking to the agencies that you work with to make sure that they stay up to date with the way that you're doing things in your school?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, I'd say the communication is really frequent, and it's great to know you can just pick up the phone and have someone there to give you that support. In terms of all of the COVID-19 planning that's happening, obviously everyone in September will be spending part of their inset looking at what the new normal kind of looks like. Now, I would want the sort of leaders of the agencies, and I know Johnny would do this, if I sent him a briefing document and said, right, this is how we're doing things at Lambeth, and this is sort of what I need tutors to be aware of when they're coming into school. I know that they'd all get that message. Equally, I think in these sort of strange times, we might go a step further and do a mini induction for the tutors who were coming in. Obviously, there's different types. Obviously, if you've got the people working with you the whole time, that's slightly different. You treat them as a normal member of staff. But I think there's probably a place for having a more of a mini induction, particularly in that first session, that says, look, this is the way things need to be.
Yes, and we're going to need to make those systems as smooth as possible so they don't take up too much of that valuable time, aren't we?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Tom, could you talk to us? Sorry, Ludo, go ahead.
Yeah, I feel like it's very good for this conversation to kind of to move on to a conversation or discussion about the National Tutoring Programme itself, and it's great to hear, Amy, that's real practical advice on how schools actually integrate or deploy tutors. And I think that kind of conversation will become really much more important as the programme moves on, and as more and more schools register their interest and start kind of working towards how to do that. So thank you very much for that. I think, Tom, I would love to ask you, how do you think we can ensure that the National Tutoring Programme works best for students themselves?
So I think we can make sure the National Tutoring Programme works best for students in kind of seeing the programme as part of the school's COVID recovery plan. So actually seeing it is a really important part of it rather than just an add-on. And what is quite encouraging when you see the information coming out about the NTP is that there's so many, I suppose, big charity organisations kind of getting involved, whether that's Teach First or the Certain Trust, and I think by having those kind of big names on board, that will give lots of schools, especially in my area, kind of like the confidence to use it and embed it within their COVID planning, especially when obviously for some of the tutoring there will be a cost, and even though it is subsidised and schools will get some of their COVID recovery kind of catch-up money, schools will still have to think carefully how they use that. But I think definitely if the NTP feels crucial to the school recovery, that is really important. And I think for my school, because we have a quite high number of pupil premium children, and I think we've never really used tutoring to support the pupil premium children, or perhaps we never used it as well as we could. And I hope that one of the things that does come out of the programme is the school has a new respect for tutoring, and also I guess those teachers in school can almost steal some of the good ideas and practice tutors have been using for a while. In the same way, they can also learn from teachers. It's a bit of a two-way street. One thing which I have noticed, especially during the lockdown over the past few months, different schools have had different provisions for online teaching. Some have done loads of it, some have done none at all. And I found that as a profession, some of us were a little bit unsure, or some of us were weren't quite sure how to use online provision in the best way to support students. And I think that's something which tutors have been doing for quite a while. And I'm hoping that is something which we'll be able to, magpie and improve, which we can use, during the National Tutoring Programme, but also when the programme ends, we'll have a legacy in our school.
Yeah, I think that's that two-way relationship that you just talked about is really important. And I think you just touched on another great point there, which was that being in schools will mean that tutors get that same kind of staff from continuous learning that teachers are able to get. So, tutors often are isolated. So that will be perhaps a very positive side effect, is that tutors are able to kind of be in that continuous learning environment that teachers benefit from. Johnny, I would love to ask you, really, just off the back of that, what do you think success would look like for the NTP?
So, I mean, the initial success of the NTP is going to be just based on the pupils that are returning to school now, having pretty much, a lot of them had no education or limited education since March. And I think we all know that there has been in that period of time a widening of the gap between disadvantaged pupils and their better off peers. And there's some really interesting studies by Tutors and Trust and the EEF around just how much that's widened and how great the catch-up will be, which is why it's awesome that the NTP has come in and is hopefully going to help us to get those pupils that haven't been able to engage for whatever reason in the last 6 months back into education, to get them back learning and make sure that this lockdown, that this epidemic doesn't have a long-lasting effect on their lives, that they're able, if they're in exam years, to go on and get the results that they need to pass next summer, or even if they're year 9, year 10 pupils, to not be set back in such a detrimental way, that they can't get what they deserve at the end of this. I think what Tom said there, I mean, you've got the more long-lasting success of NTP, which is legacy. I mean, we've supported, I was counting it up the other day, 46 different schools and academies across London over the last 12 years, which is awesome. There's about 330 schools, academies, or secondary schools and academies that we could work with. And I don't think that there are that many of them that are actually using tutors as a complement to the studies. So I'm hoping that NTP sort of awakens this idea of a collaboration between teaching and tutoring within schools, and it can be seen as another string to the bow for education. Because I mean, part of my sales pitch sometimes to heads is to say, look, if you've got a spare 30,000 sitting around and you're not sure what to do with it, you could recruit one more teacher, but that's the teacher who is going to be able to teach one subject, and you're going to need them on the books all year round. Or you could take that 30,000 and have a much more nuanced approach. You could sort of focus on English in the first term and focus on maths in the second term, and then just have a little look and see what you're struggling with in the run up to the exams, and sort of, have 10 different tutors in 10 different subjects suddenly coming in and giving that final push towards the exams. So it's a far more flexible way of providing education. So I'm hoping that idea, and that's from a purely selfish view as well, but I'm hoping that idea is embedded within schools that currently see it as, competition, which it shouldn't be. And hopefully, I know Sutton Trust have been championing the idea of tuition vouchers for a number of years, and it's a scheme that hasn't sort of got off the ground just yet, but this might be the catalyst for that to happen. So this idea that the widening of the gap is mostly happening because better off pupils have access to private tuition at home and disadvantaged pupils don't. So there's two ways to solve that. Either you make private tuition illegal, so you stop the better off kids having it, or you provide access to tuition for the disadvantaged pupils. It feels a bit like a nuclear arms race, doesn't it? It's like, you guys got to stop having tuition, or we'll have tuition over here. So hopefully, tuition is verified as having the huge impacts that the studies of the EEF have done already say that it does, and that in the future we can see tuition widen out so that everybody has access to it and all pupils are able to make the progress that they deserve, across the board. That's success from my point of view.
Yeah. I really think that, if that's what it ends up looking like, then it's there's been a real kind of positive step, hasn't it? Julia, do you have thoughts on this?
I do, of course I do. I've got tons. But this is what I want to leave you with. The question was, what would success look like for the NTP? And I think it's already been successful in raising our expectations of tutoring across the board. Because as soon as the National Tutoring Programme announced that tutor training was a eligibility criteria, what's happened is tutoring as a profession with professional development has arrived in the mainstream. And if it's necessary for the NTP, why would it not be necessary for the private sector and any other type of tutoring that we're offering? So what's happened is bigger than the NTP over here, because as thought leaders, the EEF have been able to say tutoring is so valuable that we're going to invest in it. And in order to invest in it, we expect a certain industry standard, as Tom was saying before. And so these tutor standards include a commitment to professional development. And so success for the NTP means, as Johnny said before, another string to the bow of education, and that extends and overspills the boundaries of school. And it means that students are going to have access to tutoring as another resource that's going to enable their life outcomes. And if it is that the NTP can increase the supply of able tutors and therefore cause some sort of balance in the pricing, which, as we know at the moment, pricing for tutors goes from £5 an hour to £105 an hour. What we want to do is create an industry standard, and having the NTP catalyse that is going to have a long-lasting legacy for the tuition ecosystem, which we're really, really happy to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really the benefit of bringing together these conversations. And this is certainly not the final time that we are going to talk about this, and I'm sure within 1 week a lot of stuff will be out of date. But I hope that that these, what we've discussed here, are able to help a huge number of agencies, tutors, schools, teachers, parents. There's so many cogs, Tom, as you were saying. There's so many parts to this that there's a lot to do, but we have to be speaking to as many of the components of this program as we can. And I think what you three and Julia, you as well, have been discussing there will really bring a lot to help understand what EP can benefit. And of course, you know, at this time, being involved in communities, being involved in groups that help with feedback and with advice and with tricks and tips for tutoring even, and for working in schools, for example, that's a really positive and kind of a really useful feature for educators, and especially in a time when everyone's working kind of online. The QT community goes some way to helping that. We have different groups for agency leaders, we have groups for tutors to share their tricks and tips, and really the conversation is already beginning to flow there. So the link to join the community will be in the show notes below, but please do join it. You can find it at qualifiedtutorcommunity.org. And really we welcome all tutors, educators, agencies, teachers, as there is a space for everyone there. But we'd like to thank everyone, all three of you involved today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for finding time. As I said, we would love to have you on again. I won't ask you to confirm that now, but I know that you will be very happy to join us again. So thank you very much, all three of you. If you have any last thoughts, then please do add them now. But it's been a pleasure speaking to the three of you, and we will see you again very soon.
Thank you very much for inviting us. I really enjoyed it. Very insightful.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Tom. We will see you in the next workshop of the cohort.
Yes,
Tom.
definitely. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay then. Bye.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it.